The Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Probably the most hyped up thing in indie gaming history, honestly. It's crazy to think that this game, at least for a while, was supposed to be turned into a fully fledged horror film. And honestly, out of all the games that could be turned into a film, I love this one the most, because it already has loads of lore inside of it, and seeing more of that, or maybe even a brand new story shown here, would be exciting. But there's only one major issue. The film never released. So today, let's go everything we had with the film up to now, and even determine what could be happening in the future. And spoiler alert, there's a ton of new stuff. Join my Discord, by the way, link in the description. Anyway, just to sort of keep things on a simple timeline, the first time we ever got any sort of news for the FNAF movie was all the way back in 2015, nearly 7 years ago. The first people to begin production of this film were actually supposed to be the Warner Bros., which is a huge step for video game inspired movies, especially one that at the time was based on a small indie game that was initially released just within the past year. The goal of the film around this time was to, quote, make an insane, terrifying, and weirdly adorable movie, and it was set to be directed by Gil Kenan. Now, you may be expecting some more information to come out about the film within the next few months or even years, but things were actually pretty silent for the title. We began to see some super cool teasers that were supposed to be the animatronics used for the film, but other than that, things were pretty quiet. Too quiet, in fact. The next piece of official information that we got wouldn't be until 2017, where Scott had hit us with some pretty unfortunate news. According to Scott, there were tons of issues with the movie industry, along with problems relating to FNAF altogether, which led to him stating that he was actually entirely back to square one. This honestly seemed like a dark place for the FNAF movie, as quickly the series itself was moving on to bigger and better things, but the film was already falling behind, most likely being one of the reasons why the film was actually entirely rewritten. But this is far from the end of the movie, of course, as a few months later we were given a massive teaser by Scott showing a director's chair that had Freddy Fazbear's name on it, with a logo in the background representing the company Blumhouse Productions. Or in other words, Warner Bros. Was no longer going to be controlling this movie with Scott, but rather it was moved over to this other company from this point forward. Gil Kenan had confirmed later in the year that he was no longer directing the film after Warner Bros. Stepped away, but later we would find out director Chris Columbus was taking over. Things once again went quiet this point forward, but not for nearly as long, thankfully enough. Because as 2018 began to come around, this came with quite a bit of news. And for once, I dare could say that we heard something pretty promising for the film. So in August of 2018, Scott himself had confirmed that a draft for the FNAF movie script was finally completed. And ambitiously enough, Scott had actually confirmed there were possibilities for a second film or even a third one. This all meant that the script would just have to be finished and the planning for the filming was inevitably gonna follow. Eventually, we also got ourselves a release date for the film of 2020. So while things were definitely still a ways away, at least this time around there was a huge amount of communication, and for the first time ever, the movie seemed like it was actually going to be produced. The script eventually was actually finalized around the late 2019 era, so filming was expected to follow. Information would begin to slowly dial down as the movie was preparing for a full-scale production, and the next piece of information we would get wasn't until mid-2020, where we were reassured that the movie was being made, but things were a bit shakier this time around as Jason Blum, the founder of Blumhouse Productions, the people making this movie, didn't actually want to give any release estimations this time. So with that being said, it's pretty safe to say that this original 2020 release date was a little bit outdated. But regardless, things were once again looking super up for this film as Blum had lots of good things to say about the movie, and the hype for it was beginning to rise once again. If this all wasn't good enough, Scott confirmed in late November of the same year that the script was officially going to go into filming in spring of 2021. So if we were ever going to get the film, this was surely going to be it. Sure, the estimated 2020 release date was a bit off, but that didn't really matter that much anymore, because after 6 years at this point, everything was all coming together. But when things finally began to look up more than ever, we stopped hearing information once again. This didn't inherently have to be a bad sign because throughout the entire timeline, they've gone quiet multiple times to work on the movie more and more. But this time, after a couple months, eventually we did get updated. And in September of 2021, we got some bad news. Among the many failed scripts, this finalized one finally seemed to be it, especially after the years of waiting and drafting. But during this time, the news broke that the filming in spring, it never actually happened. And in fact, this entire script ultimately had been scrapped among the rest. Both Jason and Scott had to disappointingly once again put this movie on hold, and that's where things almost seemed to stagnate. The initial filming didn't happen, the script was out of the picture once again, and overall things weren't looking good at all. There is the silver lining that we know the movie is still being produced at this time, and eventually it may have a successful script, but at this point is where things seem to be over. This normally would have been where I ended this video off, and ever ever since we got this big pushback, I wanted to make a video on this topic as the film is something we've all been waiting on for years. So it's something that I'd love to talk about. But the only thing is, the way that everything ended up to this point felt very much like a very sad ending to a video about something that used to get me freaking out at the thought of going and seeing when I was younger. But of course, that's where I would have ended the video. But that's actually not the end of things, because we recently got an absolutely massive piece of news from Jason Blum during an interview within the past week. During a film festival by the name of South by Southwest, Jason himself attended an interview regarding his work. Inside of the interview, we hear him talk about a lot of boring movie things. However, eventually he gets to the topic of the Five Nights at Freddy's film, and he actually had some news for us. Some very interesting and promising news. According to Jason, the movie was said to be in production, of course, but he had also given us a couple key pieces of information. The first thing he mentioned was just when we would get some official news regarding the movie, and we heard some of the most promising news that I think we've ever heard about the film.
On Freddy's, we are dangerously close. I will say that. We are dangerously close. I'm just saying we're dangerously close to more news.
We are dangerously close to getting some news. That's actually incredibly reassuring, especially after everything seemed to go so wrong late of last year. We don't know what kind of news he means, but I can only imagine it's going to be some sort of trailer, casting list, maybe even official art or something, because we don't even have that. But either way, with news comes new releases. And Blum had actually talked about the release date as well in the very last sentence of the interview regarding FNAF.
Dangerously close. Okay. So that could certainly be in 23.
Yep, that is right. Five Nights at Freddy's will officially be coming out sometime in 2023 after 7 years of waiting. I cannot wait now. Well, that isn't an ideal scenario anyway. This does give me some slight deja vu, as just 2 years ago we were hearing the same things about a release year and how there's big news on the horizon just to have everything end up being scrapped. But while I won't necessarily get my hopes up, I definitely have my fingers crossed, hoping that this could actually finally be the time we get the movie. It's still a bit early to confirm very much for the film, but on a more speculative note, I imagine that this is going to be a very different movie than what we were supposed to see with Warner Bros, or even what was almost filmed and produced just last spring. But that doesn't mean it'll be bad or anything. I expect things like these animatronic teases shown earlier to be essentially meaningless, as I'd be surprised if these figures even still exist, and even more surprised if there are plans to use these things in any capacity. But all this trial and error, despite it leading to a lot of waiting, makes this movie seem a lot more promising than your average everyday video game film. Scott clearly has put so much passion into it, and while of course nowadays he is beginning to retire, he has seemed dedicated to ensuring that this movie comes out the way that he wants it. And that has been clear as day, as all of these scripts and such have been thrown out with the goal of making a movie we will all enjoy. I know FNAF gets a lot of backlash nowadays, mostly for the fact that it feels disconnected from what it used to be, but with how long and in-depth this process has been, I don't think we can get much closer to an older school yet high quality FNAF production than what we'll have here. Hopefully this ends up outshining all the other video game movies that give this mini genre a bad rep, and pray that if nothing else it at least does better than that Slender film. But I would say if you're hoping for the movie to come out soon, I wouldn't necessarily put money on it, but I could surely bet millions of dollars that whether it's released tomorrow or in the next decade, it will be done with the most care, value, and passion from the producers and Scott himself to make something that everyone will enjoy whenever that may be. This film, I feel like, even has the potential to bring FNAF back into its glory days, as ever since the first few games of the franchise, the game has lost a bit of popularity, and some people say it's even beginning to die as a title. But if you want to hear about all that controversy, check out this video here. Subscribe only if you're a cool kid, and peace.